Okay. Friends, in this module we are discussing the nature of population growth in the world as a whole, and this is the second lecture in that series. In the last lecture I talked about what was the nature of population growth in ancient society. If we broadly divide history of population growth into three periods: ancient society, actually ancient society and up to beginning of 19th century. It is more than ancient society. Then 19th and 20th century. Today we will talk about what happened during 19th and 20th century, and in the next lecture we will look more closely at the differences between population trends in developed and developing countries. Why are we specifically talking about 19th and 20th century? The reason is that up to the beginning of 19th century, the rate of growth of population was very small and fluctuating. That is why, as I said in the previous lecture, if man appeared on this planet Earth about 5 lakh years ago, then it took 5 lakh years to reach the first billion mark in 1820. In year 1820, 1820 is very important in the history of population. In 1820 AD, for the first time world population reached first billion mark, and it is from that point onwards that population growth started increasing. So, today we will specifically look at 19th and 20th century. It is also important to say right in the beginning that in ancient society the reason why growth rate was fluctuating and very small was that fertility too was not too high, as Bongard showed that the theoretical upper limit of number of children can be 40 if a woman can produce a baby between 15 years and 45 years. 15 to 45 is taken to be the reproductive period. Sometime 15 to 49 is considered to be the reproductive period, but actually the number of children rarely exceeded 7. In Hatterite tribe of United States at the border of United States and Canada, in this century, I mean in the previous century, a total fertility of 8.9 was observed, and that is believed to be one of the highest ever observed fertility rates in the world. And the reasons are social, cultural, biological, that nearly 25% of the reproductive period was not available to women for reproducing because they were either unmarried or they were widowed, divorced, separated or deserted. Then some part was not available to them because they were sterile. So, fertility rarely exceeded 8 or 9. Mortality was perhaps not always high, but it fluctuated. If it is a normal year, then perhaps mortality was as low as it is today or maybe lower sometime, but periodically due to epidemics, natural catastrophe, excessive rainfall or shortage of rainfall, I mean floods and famines and wars, violence, attack by wild animals, and lack of transport and communication, death rates must have reached very high level. In the known history, we know that when in Europe plague broke out in certain cities, in a small period of time, say 1 month or 2 months time, 25% to 50% of the whole population was wiped out by bubonic plague. So, if 50% population is wiped out, that means death rate is around 500. So, in some years normally death rates would be low, but in some years as in epidemic years death rates could go up to 80, 90, 100 or maybe in extreme cases even 500, as the history of European cities affected by bubonic plague shows. So, because of this periodic high death rate and birth rate of around 50 per thousand or total fertility rate of around 7 or 8 children, for much of the period in human history, our population remained stationary. Now, let us see what happens in 19th and 20th century. Now, in 19th century population started growing. In the 19th century, population in the developed countries started growing first. In developing countries it remained stable. The population of the developing countries remained almost stationary. I will explain what do I mean by developed and developing countries. In the developed countries, this growth of population was taken as a measure of development and it was welcome. That means, initially a positive or a high rate of growth of population was considered to be an indicator of development. It was not like today's situation in which we associate rapid population growth with underdevelopment or undevelopment or backwardness or poverty or rigid stratification system. In the beginning, when population started growing first in the developed countries, then rapid population growth was seen as a sign of economic development, because it was in economically developed countries that population was growing. In 1798, however, Malthus in his essay on the principle of population warned against growth of population. When everybody was happy, that population is growing and it is a good thing, it shows economic development, it shows a decline in wars and conflicts, it shows agricultural expansion and it shows overall improvement in productivity. It was Malthus who said that be careful, and rapid population growth can lead to vice and misery, because according to him population can grow faster than the means of subsistence available. Here one may ask what are developed and less developed countries. I say that in developed countries population growth started first and then in developing countries it followed. What are developed and developing countries? This category, many people have classified countries into developed, developing, affluent, poor, northern, southern or eastern, western, but I am using the classification of United Nations. United Nations has divided all countries of the world into two broad categories: more developed countries and the less developed countries. Then in the category of less developed countries, certain countries are classified as least developed countries. The classification is as follows: more developed regions, they comprise all regions of Europe plus Northern America, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. So, all the countries of the regions of Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, the whole of Europe plus Northern America or United States, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. Countries of this region are called developed countries. And less developed countries are countries of the regions Africa, whole of Africa, whole of Asia except Japan. Japan is considered to be part of the developed countries. Latin America, the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean plus Melanesia, Micronesia and Polynesia. All these countries are considered to be less developed countries. In the category of less developed countries, broadly in the so called third world countries, Asia, Africa and Latin America, a few of them are removed from the category of less developed countries like Japan, but broadly Asia, Africa, Latin America, this is undeveloped or developing, and Europe and Northern America and Australia and New Zealand, they are developed. In the category of developing or less developed countries, there are 49 countries which are further classified as the least developed countries of the world. These are the names of those countries: Afghanistan, Angola, Bangladesh. There are several countries of, you can see South Asia also, which are part of the least developed countries. Nepal is one, Bangladesh is another country. In Asia, then Bhutan is part of least developed countries. Then of these 49 countries, 33 are in Africa, 10 in Asia. So, it is mostly African countries which are least developed countries. 10 of them are in Asia and one country is in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 5 in Oceania. In terms of composition of population of the world, 18% of the world population is living in the developed countries and 72% of the world population is living in the developing countries. You see, in the first lecture I said that in the beginning of the Christian era, around much more than like today 18% of the world population is living in the developed countries. At that time, a much higher figure than 18 was living in the developed countries, but what has happened that over the years proportion of developing countries is increasing. 72% of the world population is living in the developing countries. 15% of the population of the developing countries is living in the least developed countries. To follow Wilcox, there is nothing in the history of the last few centuries more notable than the increase in the population of the world, the prime cause of which is the decrease in the ratio of deaths to population. Deaths to population ratio means death rate, due to a decrease in death rate. In the second half of the 18th century, the death rate in developed countries, particularly in Europe, started declining, first in northwestern European countries and then in the other parts of Europe. Under the impact of both economic and political factors, though the decline was slow, and that is why we say that population started growing mostly in 19th century. In 18th century, although it started, but this growth was very slow, and it took more than 2 centuries for death rates to come down to present levels. Since the birth rate remained high, it led to increasing rate of population growth. The birth rate fluctuated. It reached its highest level in the period of revival after the economic crisis at the beginning of 1870, which was to prove the most severe of the whole century. The high point of that climb in the birth rate was 1876, which can be regarded as the turning point in the history of European birth rate. But let me say that these fluctuations in birth rate can be ignored when we are looking at the growth rate of population overall, because fluctuations in birth rates were never so significant as the fluctuations in the death rate. Walter Wilcox on the expansion of Europe and its influence of population says the following: Europe had more than 3 times as many inhabitants in 1900 as in 1750. Means in in a gap of 150 years, they are saying that Europe had more than 3 times. You can calculate what must have been the rate of growth of Europe during this time using your P t equal to P 0 e raised to power R t. It was a very small figure, but still Europe increased from 1750 to 1900 in 150 years 3 times. Now, when we compare today's growth rate of population like in the last century in India, in just 100 years time the population of India became 4 times. Here during the period of rapid population growth in Europe from 1750 to 1900, in 150 years time Europe's population became 3 times as said by Walter Wilcox, but in India in 100 years time in the last century population became 4 times. That means, during the period of rapid growth in Europe, Europe did not grow so fast as subsequently the countries in the category of developing countries increase. Then the persons of European stock living outside of Europe in 1900 were 3/4 as many as the entire number of inhabitants of that continent in 1750. That means, European population increased and that led to migration and settlement of European people in all parts of the world outside Europe. This vast increase of Europeans by blood in 150 years from a very large figure nearly 13 crores to 50 crores has not been secured at the cost of a decrease of other human beings. Means, wherever Europeans went, their population expanded, but simultaneously population of others also expanded. So, it was not because of any conflict or because of genocide or something. European population increased, population of natives also increased. Wilcox may be trying to suggest that there was some kind of civilizational effect on others, and as civilization spread, population of other countries too expanded. On the contrary, the native stocks reached by Europeans have usually increased in numbers. This is true of nearly all numerous groups living mainly by agriculture in the tropical or subtropical regions of America, Africa, Asia, Malaysia, where the influence of Europe has not gone and we have any clue to the facts. They indicate a stationary population. All those less developed countries where European influence was not seen, which remained say outside colonization, their population remained stationary, and the enormous increase in the population of the earth from perhaps 1 billion in 1750 to 1.5 in 1900 must be ascribed mainly to the expansion of Europe. This is Wilcoxon, one estimate. Not all, everybody will agree with these estimates, but the point is, which will be acceptable to most, that during this time beginning in 18th century and in 19th and 20th century, population of Europe started increasing, population of settlements of Europe started increasing, and that was not at the cost of natives. And the population of those countries which according to Wilcoxon remained uncivilized because they were not reached by Europeans, their population remained stationary. The world population reached the first billion mark in 1820, and after that it started growing at faster and faster pace, first due to greater decline in the death rate in the developed countries, and then due to decline in death rate in the developing countries. So, the growth of population in 19th and 20th century is not because of any increase in fertility. Fertility did not increase. As a matter of fact, in many countries fertility started declining. In countries like France, reduction in death rate and reduction in birth rate was almost simultaneous, but in other countries too, with some time lag, birth rate declined. So, it was not because of increase in birth rate, but because of decrease in death rate that population started growing. Then, I will show you a table in which various dates are mentioned when the world population reached second, third, fourth billion marks. it exhibits that in the early 19th century population started growing, yet the growth rate was low. And as explained earlier, the reason is that this growth was confined to the developed countries, in which say 1/4 of the whole world population lived. When the growth started beginning in less developed countries, where 3/4 or 3/4 of world population lived, obviously its impact on the population growth rate of the whole world was much more. In the developing countries, life expectancy at birth was around 20 and death rate was around 50. In our country also, only 100 years ago, in the beginning of the last century, our birth rate was around 50 and our life expectancy was around 20s. There are estimates that it was around 22 years, but subsequently under the effect of influenza epidemic around 1918, life expectancy declined to nearly 20 years. Thus, despite a high fertility, means a birth rate of 50 and total fertility rate of 7, world population started growing fast in the 20th century, particularly in the second half of the 20th century. This is the time when mortality rates declined with suddenness in the less developed countries and their fertility rates remained unchanged. If you closely look at the history of decline in death rate, in what happened in Europe in nearly 300 years time, from the beginning of 18th century to beginning of say 21st century, what happened in 300 years time, very close to that happened in just a decade or 2 decades in less developed countries. In a typical case of this rapid decline in death rate, in Sri Lanka around 1945, death rates declined by nearly 50% in just 1 year time, and that was due to spread of DDT and control of malaria. So, let us look at this table. The first billion is reached in 1820, and how much time the world population took to reach first billion mark? 5 to 10 lakh years. The most conservative estimate would be 5 lakh years. So, it took 5 lakh years to reach the first billion mark, and when was the second billion reached? In 1930. In just 110 years time, the second billion was added to the world population growth. The third billion was added, or the third billion was reached in 1960 in only 30 years time. In only 30 years time between 1930 and 1960, the world population increased from second billion to third billion. Then in just 14 years time after that, in 1974, the world population reached fourth billion mark, and after that it took only 13 years to reach the fifth billion mark, and then only 12 years to reach the sixth billion mark in 1999. See the rate at which population started growing in the 20th century. That is why population became an issue. In one of my lectures, I was saying that initially in writings of intellectuals, philosophers, economists, you do not find much mention of population in 18th century. Even in the beginning of 19th century, not much is discussed on population, except that Malthus wrote a sensational essay and people started reacting to that. And that was because the population was not growing at all, or it was growing at such a slow pace that population itself would not affect the socio-economic, political and other demographic trends. So, the writings of philosophers, intellectuals and social scientists are silent on the matter. But when population started growing so fast that it takes only 110 years and then only 30 years, then 14 years, then 13 and only 12 years to add 1 billion. It took 5 lakh years to reach the first billion mark, but between 1987 and 1999 it takes only 12 years time to add another billion. So, this is the time when population growth is affecting all calculations of planners in terms of productivity, employment, poverty, inequality, opportunities, standard of living, and population becomes a major issue. Population becomes a very major issue in the second part of 20th century, when you see that addition of 1 billion is taking less than 25 years. If we assume that it would take nearly 12 years again to reach the next billion, we can roughly say that sometime in year 2011, means next year, the world population will reach the 7 billion mark. Thus, in the period 1820 to 2011, less than 200 years time, the world population has grown nearly 7 times. 200 years, 7 times. Nobody in 18th century could have imagined this explosion of population. Kirk said that in Europe mortality declined. Now, the issue is, then why did this happen? Why did mortality decline? There are many theories. In the first phase up to the later part of 18th century, some improvement in mortality may have occurred due to improvement in income, but nothing is known about this period. Beginning the later part of 18th century, mortality started falling mainly due to public order created by the modern state. Means it was a political cause rather than medical. Other factors such as improvement in agriculture, improvement in nutrition, in hygiene, in infrastructure, improvement in transport and communication, and reduction in famines and epidemics also helped in reducing mortality levels. Yet the improvement in mortality occurred independently of medical intervention. The moment we talk of mortality or improvement in mortality, immediately our attention is drawn to improvement in medical sciences or spread of health infrastructure. But as a matter of fact, when mortality was declining in the European countries or in today's developed countries, health improvement in the sense of advances in medical sciences or expansion of health and infrastructure did not play very significant role. It was improvement in income, transport, communication, labor laws, improved labor laws, better organization of work, and perhaps political factors, rise of nation states leading to curtailment of conflicts or wars between small countries or nations or kingdoms. That was the major cause of improvement in mortality. In the third phase, from the last third of the 19th century to World War I, improvement in mortality occurred due to medical discoveries. Now medical discoveries in antibiotics, sulfur drugs, sulfonamides, penicillin, particularly due to control of diseases like diarrhea and tuberculosis. It is the time when improvement in mortality occurs due to medical reasons. Finally, in the fourth phase, during World War II and afterwards, discovery of penicillin and other chemicals reduced mortality due to epidemics and contagious diseases. Thus, it is perhaps not correct to say that advancement in medical sciences is a major factor in improvement in mortality in the 19th century. 20th century, yes, but not 19th century. The case of less developed countries is different. Here much of mortality decline occurred after World War II, when a large number of them became independent. Countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, they became independent. National governments were formed and they took a special interest in promoting health and nutrition with financial support and knowledge support from outside. This was the time when DDT, antibiotics and other drugs were already available in the developed countries, and the less developed countries had to apply them to control infectious diseases as part of their public health program. In this period, mortality improved in all less developed countries suddenly, and this happened. This sudden decline in death rate happened irrespective of culture, religion, level of economic development, ideology and social structure. In the previous lecture, somebody had asked what is the role of socio-cultural factors in population growth. I did not discuss socio-cultural factors, but you see in ancient society socio-cultural factors were of very little importance. Death rates were universally high and fertility rates were around 7 or 8. In decline in death rate in less developed countries in the last century after 1950 or after Second World War, again socio-cultural factors played a very little role, because death rates declined suddenly in all countries, Hindu, Muslim, Christians, irrespective of religion, irrespective of language, irrespective of whether they were poor or rich, in Asia, in Africa, Latin America, everywhere death rates started declining. Some correlation between death rate and economic development remained, no doubt, but death rates declined in all less developed countries. The sudden decline in post war mortality in the less developed countries caused population explosion, and in several of them population was found growing at rate 3% and above. You see, when a population grows at rate 3%, then the doubling time is 23 years. In 23 years time population doubles. This suddenness created disequilibrium in society. We do not yet understand the full implications of this. What is the impact of population on society? Just to mention about this 6th billion thing, because it made news, on Wednesday 13th October 1999, BBC News announced the birth of the 6th billionth baby with the following photograph. I will show you the photograph. UNFPA had estimated that around 12th October 1999, the 6th billionth child would be born. According to UN symbol, it is a symbolism. It was a baby boy born in a clinic in Sarajevo, the Bosnian capital, a city scarred by years of war, where the 6th billionth baby was born in UN Secretary General Mr. Kofi Annan's presence. The UN chose as D6B the day of 6th billion. D means day, 6B, 6 billion, the day when humanity passed the symbolic threshold of 6 billion. This is the picture that was released by United Nations. UN chief welcomes 6th billionth baby, a baby with her mother in Sarajevo. It cannot be said with certainty where exactly the 6th billionth baby was born. Every minute, every second, children are born in various parts of the world, and you can't exactly identify. It was a symbolic event that UN General Secretary was present. They chose it to be a less developed country, a war-torn country, a country part of that region in which rate of growth of world population is high. Today families can say, why did United Nations choose a baby boy to celebrate 6 billionth, why not a girl child? So these are matters of interpretations, but the point is that we reached 6 billion on that day or around that time. There was something to be celebrated, and on the other hand it was a moment for thinking and acting. We are reaching, or perhaps have already reached, the carrying capacity of earth, and there is a need to plan for the future. How long can we grow? Although this question was always posed in the past for last 200 years, how can we afford to grow more? When we reach 2nd billion, 3rd billion, always this question was asked, and we added another billion. Now, when we reach 6 billion, this question was asked, what is our carrying capacity? Can we add one more billion? We have already added nearly 1 billion, and next year we will be reaching 7th billion mark. But yes, it is a serious issue, and more time passes, more we reach 7th or 8th, more this issue becomes significant. Here it is important to make a distinction between physical carrying capacity and cultural carrying capacity. Maybe somebody can say that this earth has food or subsistence even for 10 billions. We are reaching only 7 billion mark, perhaps 10 billion people can survive. But does mankind look for survival only or for survival with a decent living standard? So, carrying capacity, physical carrying capacity, how many people can be supported by Mother Earth, this is one thing, and if we consider survival with some minimum standard of living, some decent standard of living, then the complexion of the question changes. Then we are talking of cultural carrying capacity. Maybe the earth has physical carrying capacity of supporting 10 billion, but at what standard? We do not want earth to support 10 billion at the standards of Bangladesh. Everybody wants to have standards of United States. So, can the Mother Earth support 10 billion at the standards of United States? That takes us to the issue of cultural carrying capacity. One may argue that it will be possible to for earth to sustain more population. The question is at what level of cultural standards? Are only numbers important and quality of life is not important at all? If quality of life is also important, then the carrying capacity would be much less. So, the debate on population size cannot be separated from debate on desired quality of life. It is in the interest of both developed and developing countries to achieve global improvement in mortality levels and reduce the birth rate. We cannot have a policy of raising death rates to curb population growth. We want death rates to reduce further, but we want to control growth rate by reducing fertility rate. Before you ask some question, let me also show 1 or 2 slides on international migration. This is another issue. Globalization and awareness opportunities elsewhere, poverty, wars, political and ethnic conflicts in different parts of the world, natural disasters and climatic changes are producing large streams of international migration. There is a sizable flow of international migrants, mostly from developing countries to developed countries. In terms of rates, the net migration rate in the more developed countries is 3 per 1000, plus 3 indicates net immigration. There is both immigration and emigration. Net is plus 3, means net is immigration, immigration is more than emigration, and the net migration rate in the developing countries is -1. The two rates suggest that the same amount of migration affects the developed countries more than then it lessens the demographic burden in the developing countries. Moreover, there are many developing countries with a large immigration rate above 5 per 1000. They are Western Sahara, Burundi, Seychelles, Botswana, Bahrain, Cyprus and United Arab Emirates. According to Population Division of United Nations Secretariat estimates made in 2005, in some countries like USA, Russian Federation and Germany, which come in the category of top 20 countries having largest numbers of international migrants. In some countries of the developed world, according to Population Division of United Nations, in 2005, there were more than 5% of immigrants. The countries are USA, Russian Federation and Germany, which come in the category of top 20 countries having the largest number of international migrants. You can imagine what are the consequences of this large international migration in developed and developing countries. There are positive consequences as well as negative consequences. Among positive consequences for the developed countries are immigration consists of highly trained professionals, that is why they welcome migrants. Industrially advanced countries are facing the problem of aging, and immigrants being mostly young can counter the effect of fall in fertility to a great extent. And then certain activities for which they do not have the native talent get done. There are negative consequences, effect on employment, effect on culture, language, religion, and migrants posing a threat to their traditions and customs, social diversity, lack of loyalty to history and tradition when lot of migrants come from other countries, and greater surveillance requirements. For developing countries also there are positive and negative consequences. Positive consequences are lessening of population pressure, remittances, knowledge transfer, voice in the developed countries, modernization, and investments by non-resident countrymen in new ideas. Negative consequences are brain drain. Everybody talks of brain drain in less developed countries, and then loss of enterprising people, young, able-bodied, productive, and negative impact on the local culture, part of globalization, localization, and interference in political and other matters by the wealthy and powerful non-residents. However, it must be said that there are multiple causes of migration, and the effect of migration on receiving and sending countries depend heavily on the causes and volume of migration. It is likely that in years to come there will be more international migration, and it is difficult to predict all the consequences of this.
So, thank you, sir. The presentation was so interesting and informative. I have two doubts. First of all, regarding with the concept of fertility. In your presentation, you mentioned about total fertility rate. I am familiar with the concept of fertility rate, that is number of children produced by women in the reproductive. What's the difference between fertility rate and total fertility? That's second question is regarding with the relation between population and development. You also mentioned that earlier that population is considered as an indicator of development. But now we know that population is considered as a hurdle for development, especially in the least developing countries. But at the same time, countries like in the Scandinavian and European countries are also facing scarcity of manpower. Is there any concept of, in this sense, optimum population for India or optimum population for Europe or America? This is also.
Okay. Thank you. Regarding your first question, see, this fertility is measured in terms of both birth rate and total fertility rate. Birth rate means number of children born per year per thousand population. The upper limit of birth rate has usually been around 50 per thousand. In most countries where fertility was high, birth rate was around 50. And total number of children, as I told you that it was in Hutterite population, a tribe of United States at the border of United States and Canada, the total fertility rate or the average number of children produced in entire lifetime by a woman, average woman, was 8.9, around 9 children. There have been some women who are known to have produced even 15 children, but on the average in a population 9 has been perhaps the upper limit. But in most populations, when we talk of higher fertility levels, we have something in mind like 7 children. In the last lecture I said that in UP in 1972 our IIT Kanpur itself conducted a large survey, and in rural areas of UP average number of children was found to be 8. So, this is regarding the difference between birth rate and fertility. Today birth rate in several developed countries has come down to a level of 7 or 8, and total fertility means average number of children in entire lifetime has gone below 1.5. That is why they are suffering from what they call population implosion. On the other hand, we are facing population explosion, excessive growth of population. Could you repeat your second question?
consider in the early
Okay, population and development. Okay, in the beginning, when late 19th century and early part of 20th century, when people were happy that population is increasing, that was because so far population was constant, and population was constant was largely because of high death rate. So, when population started growing due to reduction in death rate, obviously something good was happening: economic development, industrialization, political stabilization, means reduction in wars, conflicts, violence, homicides, suicides. So, people felt happy that something good is happening, and death rates declined at such a slow pace that, as I told you, it took more than 200, in some cases 300 years for death rates to decline from level of 50 to level of 10. So, that was okay. What happened in the less developed countries? So, in the that is why in the developed countries they say they found population growth to be an asset for them at that time. They also find population to be an asset today because their total fertility rate has gone below replacement level, and most of them are suffering from what we call aging of population. Proportion of people in older ages is increasing, 60 plus, 80 plus, and proportion of 80 plus among 60 plus, they are suffering from aging of population. So, at a time when they are facing population implosion, for them population is an asset even today. In our countries, in less developed countries, population started growing at a very fast rate after Second World War, and that was largely because of sudden control of infectious diseases like plague, cholera, malaria, diarrhea, dysentery, infectious diseases, tuberculosis, and the time that, while developed countries took 300 years time to reduce their death rate from 50 to 10, less developed countries took only, some countries took 10 years, some 20 years, 30 years to bring about the same order of change in death rate. So, suddenly their population started growing. In the developed countries, when population grew, even during the peak period, their rate of growth never exceeded 1%. So, they did not face the so called negative consequences of population. Less developed countries, when they were growing in the second part of the last century because of sudden reduction in death rate, several countries were growing at rate 3% per year. Some countries were growing even at 4% per year. So, it was this unprecedented increase in the rate of growth of population, leading to sudden increase in requirements for satisfying consumption requirements, and this was also the time when they became independent and they required money to be invested in economy, so that the rate of growth of income increases, and the connection was seen to be negative because to grow rapidly in economic sense you require more investment. The investment comes from saving, and to have more saving in a country, you must have lesser consumption. When population is growing fast, you need more to satisfy the consumption requirement of already large population and then requirements of the growing population. So, the money left for saving is less. You remember, when our country became free in the beginning, during the first 5-year plan period, what was our rate of investment? Hardly 5%. We need an investment rate, a poor country like ours needed an investment rate of around 25%, so that we could grow at a respectable rate of growth, but there was no money. So, when population is rising at such a fast rate and there is very little to invest in the national economy, so that is why a negative connection between the two, population and development, was seen.
Your presentation actually says that I think in developed countries of the total population, I think it's around 7 billion, 6 or 7 billion. I don't know exactly the figure. So, which continent is more? I think Asia is Asian,
Yeah,
Asia is the most.
Yes,
most
India and China.
India and China. Okay. I think
Yes.
it's around 40 or
Yes.
40% of.
In population, China is the largest country of the world, followed by India. And there are projections that because China through its one child policy has already reduced its growth rate, and India's growth rate is still quite high, 1.7% per year. So, there are projections that if these trends continue, then after a gap of certain number of years, that years depend on our assumptions regarding growth differentials, but maybe after 30 years or 40 years, population of India will become larger than the population of China. Then population of India would be the largest population of the world.
Somewhere I read that actually now in Africa the population is decreasing because of there's mentioned that I don't know exactly the reason. HIV is they cited some reason. The population is growth is decreasing. I don't know.
Actually, there is some misunderstanding about this issue. As such, growth rate of Africa is quite high. When somebody makes a statement like you are saying that due to HIV, their population is declining, population is not declining as such, but their life expectancy could have been much more and their growth rate could have been much more if they did not have HIV. Not all African countries, but there are some African countries in which up to 20% of the total adult population is HIV positive. And demographers have estimated what is the impact of this 20% HIV on the life expectancy of those countries. But there are many other African countries where HIV prevalence is not even 5%. So, it depends. HIV is such an issue that because there is no cure for HIV, we can only prevent it, and if proper preventive measures are not taken, then HIV can spread like an epidemic. That is why sometimes exaggerated statements of this kind are made, but due to HIV African population is not declining. Of course, their life expectancy would be much more if they did not have HIV. Thank you.